Hey everybody, today I am going to be talking about style over substance movies. I asked you guys, what are some movies that you think are better, that are more stylistic in nature? And the reason I bring that up is because I think, in today's world, there's a lot of style over substance that to me is more just distracting from lazy writing. And a lot of people I find are easily swept up in the aesthetic of things. But at the same time, I do think there are a lot of great films where stylistically it informs the substance in very interesting ways. So I think there are films that are more stylistic in nature that are very, very good, masterpieces, and then others I think that are more just a way to distract from the lack of a real consistent, strong story at the center. But before we get into that, I will plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist and I do commission portraits. I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you're interested in, you can always go to the website below, and if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me. My email is in the description box below as well. All right, so let's begin with the first one. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. He takes a routine comic book story and embraces the cheese, giving it so much more personality than any MCU story. The performances, dialogue, and action choreography make it feel like they're winking at the camera all throughout. Plus, Willem Dafoe, as the Green Goblin with that hilarious voice and laugh, is quintessential B-movie villain. Totally. Absolutely agree with that. I really struggle a lot with the superhero movies. Not all of them. There are always going to be interesting ones, but just overall, and I just feel like there's a real human element missing to it. But yes, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man was at a different time. And I think that little by little, we've sort of drained the poetry out of superhero movies. I love the fact that they are like comic books, or I like the ones that emulate the comic book style, like the original Superman. Movies that aren't afraid to kind of have fun with it and be cheeky and create kind of a cartoonish sort of world while also, trying to create a very good core story. And that's the thing about Spider-Man, the original Spider-Man, is that, as you say, it's never not cheeky. It's always winking at you. It's always having fun with itself. But at the same time, it knows when to be serious. It knows when to give their characters their moments. And overall, there is a good payoff. It is not my favorite superhero movie, but looking back on it, I enjoy Sam Raimi and his passion. He has the passion of somebody who's not a blockbuster filmmaker because, he's more into that like 70s B schlock sort of thing, into the cheesy horror. And he brings all of that into the fun and the creativity of this big budget movie. And again, I don't see that very often in superhero movies. So absolutely, I can see why you like that one. Climax. I don't think Noé set out to say anything with the movie, and it's very much an exercise in his particular style of cinema. And what an exercise it was. Otherworldly, dizzying camera work matched with the seeming labyrinthine design of the seemingly blood-soaked dance school makes a truly nightmarish watch. And honestly, I can't get enough of it. I can't get enough of it either. Huge fan of Climax, and everybody knows that already. I don't know if I agree with you fully on that. You're saying that you're not sure if Noah's really out to say anything with it. I think overall you're right. I think he's just kind of having fun. He's the kind of guy who you don't have to worry about that sort of thing. He's not real lofty in his messaging. He more likes to experiment, very much like a kid, and just have fun with it. He really likes improvisation, and he likes to kind of chip away at an idea and see where he arrives at, which is very, I would say, unique. But out of that comes a more immersive experience, and one that really draws you in a way that feels very much like a Rorschach test. And I think it can mean different things to different people, but there is a consistency there. And all of his movies do have a very kind of existential philosophy going on there, a very psychedelic philosophy, and it all comes together, it all comes full circle. So in that sense, yes, I do think there is an idea of a message, but when it comes to what's actually going on screen, I don't think it's very well thought out. And very few people can pull that off, but I think it works, again, in his instance, because he is so embracing the style in order to inform something that has more weight to it, something more meaningful. Because I do find myself, even though it is more of a surface level experience, I find myself feeling more and being more immersed in his sorts of films at times. And I find myself more affected than I am by more traditional films. Yes, it is a truly nightmarish experience. I do wish, though, that there had been a little bit more cohesion in that movie. The more you watch it, it is a movie I think that's important to see multiple times, just because there's so many little things going on throughout the movie, little stories here and there, and it just helps to really catch them all again multiple times. And once you see that, you start to see it would have been nice if some of these side stories had been paid off a little bit more, there was a little bit more of a meat to the core of it, I think would have really helped the film, maybe taken it to a new level. I'm not saying I want him to fully sacrifice that skeletal nature, because I think that's what makes him powerful, ironically, but I do think it could have used a little bit of that. I just like finding a balance. Even if it is more stylistic in nature, I think it does need, something to balance that out. I don't consider this style over substance, and I don't really feel that a film is bad for having it, but only God forgives. It is meditative and visually beautiful, about the bleak underworld of Bangkok and what it means to pay for your consequences. Absolutely floored by both Gosling and Scott Thomas's chemistry and performances. It is a simple story told visually well, and my absolute favorite Refn film. I do understand the criticisms, but that has not stopped me from making this one of my all-time most cherished films. And yeah, that's fine. Like if you're into, style over substance just for the sake of style, more power to you. I think a lot of people are like that. That's just not necessarily me most of the time. I have seen this movie. Couldn't tell you anything about it because I was high as hell, and I was with a guy I was dating at the time. He wanted me to see it, and I do remember thinking that every shot was extraordinary. Every shot looked absolutely amazing, and I wanted to frame every single one of them, but I was so kind of lost in my, not sober state that it kind of worked in that instance. No idea what was going on in the plot and didn't particularly care. I was just having fun looking at the imagery, and, it was evoking certain sensations in me naturally. But I get the feeling that I wouldn't like the film sober, and I remember thinking that at the time. I will say, I think visually, aesthetically, I preferred this way more than Drive. I actually think Drive, while it has, very interesting composition at times, I also think it lacks a little bit of personality, and I talked about that in my review. I actually preferred this, but as a story experience, definitely Drive is the one that achieves to me more that substance, or I should say style over substance argument the best, because it finds a little bit more of a balance, I think, than this film. This film, unfortunately for me, falls under the category of it leans too heavily into the style for me in a way that a lot of movies today do. Again, where we're kind of not focusing on consistency and cohesion, and we're more going for the eye candy because it distracts. Leos Carax's masterpiece, Holy Motors. The style is the message here. That's a perfect example of what I mean. Yes, Leos Carax is, he started out as a film critic. So, he had an idea of how he looked at film from a kind of a bird's eye view, and he could analyze it, and he could look at substance, he could look at style, and the sort of meta implications there, and what goes into making art in all kinds of different ways, emotionally or whatnot. And yeah, he does a lot of experimentations. In Holy Motors, there are times where, little stories will break off and you wonder, where is this going? Does it even have a point? Maybe it doesn't have to have a point. There's just a beauty in the act of creation. And then other parts of it absolutely have a point to it. But I do think it finds a really beautiful balance between all of those things. For me, I don't know what my answer is to this question, just because there are too many films that I could sort of name. But just off the top of my head, I just finished watching Cowboy Bebop for the millionth time, but I hadn't seen it in many years all the way through. And I'm talking about the original show. I had to get the bad taste out of my mouth from that live action Netflix version. And it was just wonderful because to me, that show is about the act of style. Just on a surface level, you think, oh, we're going to get really into this because it has eye candy and it's fun, it's pulpy. And then it becomes about so much more. That surface level way that it entices you forward does so that when you can plunge through it, poke through all that surface style, you realize there's a loneliness and a pain, there's a melancholy and emptiness and this existential dread going on. That show to me, and I said this when it was finished, it has a quality to it where you don't realize how good it is until it's over. Just like many of the things in life, often we don't realize how powerful they are, how important they are until they're over. So all of that, I think, really works well, and I think that's a perfect example of a style informing substance, but really it is style that creates pathos, that really creates depth in a way that I was surprised by. Using all of these different genres and styles that are very much romanticized in Western culture, and then, just breaking through them in a way that I find to be really beautiful. And I guess this kind of ties into the next one, because this person says, I think it has to be Blade Runner. That movie is a visual feast for the eyes, and I love it. but the story isn't really that engaging or well-paced. Still one of my favorites, though. The atmosphere is incredible. That I feel the exact same way. And I obviously compare Cowboy Bebop to Blade Runner a lot. Certainly there's a lot of influence there. But yeah, I mean, I've reviewed Blade Runner and I've talked about it many times. I think it's a stunning, stunning piece of work. And I think you want to talk about world building, you want to talk about really kind of creating a detailed, rich environment that allows you to be fully immersed. That's it. That said, the story doesn't really move me. It's not something I gravitate to like I do with Cowboy Bebop. That's the one that has the real heart. But it's, you know, again, it's hard to find. You have to look, again, beyond the surface level entertainment of it. And with Blade Runner, I can see myself watching it more and more and finding more kind of depth there, a little bit more of that pathos. But as it exists, I still find myself feeling this dread and this melancholy, even though I'm not really necessarily that attached to the emotions of the story. There's just, the imagery of it is stunning. Like the girl that's running and she gets like, breaks the glass and it's in slow motion and the lights and the mannequins. Like, it's a very painful image, but also a cold one. There's just a lot going on in the imagery there that for me is why I keep returning to it. It is one of those few films for me that, I guess, kind of like what was said about Only God Forgives earlier, I love that it's stylistic. That is actually what appeals to me about it. And even if it is an example of a movie that, you know, maybe I didn't care for in terms of the story or in terms of the characters or whatever, I still think it's important to acknowledge just the art direction that went into it. You know, maybe prop designers, there's like really great sets, there's really great costumes, there's a really great cinematography, there's a great look to it. All of those things, you know, people work hard on that too. It just may not come together fully for me. I think Dunkirk is an example of a film that doesn't try to say a lot by diving deep into some characters, but instead lets the audience feel the tragedy of war primarily through its amazing visual and acoustic style. At the same time, the characters are easily interesting enough to make this an actual movie and not just a series of events that happen to take place, but the focus is clearly on taking the historical event and retelling it, not through a documentary, but through an experience you can feel. The characters the movie creates are merely gateways for the audience to get close so the style can have an impact. This is cinema. Yes, absolutely. Everyone knows about my struggles with Christopher Nolan. I admire a lot about him, and I also think that there's a lot of things that are a detriment to him ultimately. Dunkirk, for me, is true cinema. To me, that is where he fully achieved everything I think he ever set out to do, and he did it with real, like an editorial eye. He really knew when to say no, he knew when to really emphasize certain strengths, and I think it is his magnum opus. I think it is absolutely his masterpiece, not too self-indulgent, and that often becomes one of my criticisms of him. He knew how to go for minimal dialogue because dialogue is not his strong suit at all. He learned that really what he's good at is messing with the idea of time and how we can look at that from a sort of meta perspective. And so he does that here, but in a way that's not so on the surface. You kind of have to see the film maybe 2 or 3 times to really figure out what he's doing with the editing, how he's messing with time, and how time shifts between the different character stories. And there's several going on here. There is something very clean and modern about that. It feels fresh, it feels different, and yet it has so much impact to it. It's a mastery, I think, in editing. And yes, as you say the characters, they're not necessarily, and typically they're not with Nolan movies, especially the ones that he writes himself. You know, characters are not necessarily the thing that he's after. He's not going for characters that have, you know, major personalities and particularly human. They're chess pieces, they're kind of stand-ins, and they work more, you know, to create an overall effect. It's less about individual characters. So I like what you say here when you say that, you know, these characters are almost like gateways for the audience to be led into the experience, and I absolutely agree. Yeah, no, I think Dunkirk is one of the great achievements of Nolan's career, and I do think it's one of the better war films to come out of, you know, like big mainstream Hollywood in a while. And a perfect example of him finding that balance of style absolutely informing the substance. So there you go. It can happen. But that is my video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Over here you will see my patrons who are wonderful. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.